Hello everybody and welcome back to LRN and another race week as we preview the French Grand Prix, the going ahead this weekend. So really excited about this one, and we're going to look at the latest news and headlines that have come up over the last few days ahead of this race. So one of the big ones, as the thumbnail suggests, is Christian Horner and his views on how Mercedes have improved over the last obviously few races, and he feels they'll bring further improvements through the summer break. So Christian Horner is quoted as saying, we'll expect them to be quick at Paul Ricard. They're showing flashes of being there or thereabouts. The last two races have been pretty decent for them, and there's been no sign, I think, of any porpoising at all. So they seem to be slowly bringing themselves back into the game. And this also echoes Jolyon Palmer's comments that they're dark horses for a race win in France, and that they will continue to build on the progress they've made over the last few races, which I certainly agree with. I think it would be so good, not only us for fans, but for the sport in general, if we had 6 drivers competing for wins week in, week out. That would be a massive improvement on where we've been over the last few years. Of course, we had basically 7 years of Mercedes winning constructors. Only at the very end did we see Red Bull challenging, obviously with Max winning the drivers' championship, but them still missing out on the constructors. So Mercedes very much still dominant. But the funny thing is, you actually still have Alonso coming out and saying that it still hasn't gone far enough. The sport is still too boring and too predictable from Alonso's point of view. And I guess, we tried sort of, if you remember the A1 series of quite a few years ago, it didn't really take off. But the premise was that all of the drivers on that grid would have equal machinery. And I think Alonso, really, that's what he's after. He wants it so that at every race, anyone on that grid could potentially win. And that's what he's kind of talking about. But I think what we've had is massive progress. If I was to liken it to sort of football, we've gone from like a Bundesliga environment where, or maybe Scottish football in the past, but Bundesliga environment where Bayern Munich will win the league every year. Occasionally someone like Dortmund would come along and maybe challenge them, take them like halfway through the season, then they'll fall away. That's what we had with Mercedes winning the title every year. Obviously Red Bull acting as that sort of Dortmund team, whereas towards the end of that 7 years, they finally nearly someone other than Mercedes won the constructors championship. But obviously Mercedes still took it as expected. But moving into now, where we've got the new F122 cars, we've moved from a Bundesliga environment to sort of more La Liga environment at the moment, where you've got 2 massive teams always fighting each other for that win. So we're kind of in a situation where it's, you've got Barcelona and Real Madrid are your Ferrari and Red Bull. They're going to fight the front. And then you've got sort of people right below them. Atletico Madrid at the moment will kind of be Mercedes, because they're sort of sat on their own as the 3rd best team. And then you've got a bunch of others that are the midfield fighting it out. And then the ones at the bottom that are sort of, fighting for relegation. So it kind of works out like that in Formula One. And what he wants to move to, what Alonso would like to see, is a shift to where the entire, I guess he couldn't expect that, the teams down the bottom could potentially win the championship and it would be fully equal. He knows that won't happen, but I think what he'd really like is a Premier League kind of opportunity to Formula One, where yes, you do have your favourites for each race, you do have the teams that you would expect to win, but on any given race, anyone from any car could potentially pull something out the bag with great strategy, great drive, that it's close enough that a driver can have a real impact and just on the odd race really outperform the car. And I know we do get it occasionally with the McLarens winning at Monza and things of that nature. Where Pierre Gasly got his first win, where Perez got his first win, and it does happen, but normally only under extreme events, normally with DNFs happening to the lead cars, something really that they don't win it entirely on merit. They win it by being opportunistic, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what obviously Alonso wants to see is the racing on the track, and those cars that you wouldn't normally see at the front getting there. So we're not there yet. But I don't think any fan would question the fact that we've had a massive jump forward this season. Alonso obviously not pleased, but from my point of view and Christian Horner's point of view, he's correct. The fans would love to see 6 cars. Would be a fantastic starting point, wouldn't it? To have 6 cars fighting for wins week in, week out. Even if it wasn't every race, just to have that a few times a season would be brilliant, and changing who those teams are would be better. You know, what goes from high downforce to low downforce circuits, the teams that perform at one maybe aren't as good as the other, so other teams step up that are much better in high downforce scenarios, and then they're fighting for wins. So we'll hopefully see more of that develop over the next few seasons. But just to be potentially in a place, even if it isn't every race weekend, just some of them where we have three teams really all equal fighting at the front, will be brilliant. And the wheel-to-wheel racing it will produce, hopefully, will be brilliant. As we've seen, you know, the back end of Silverstone was absolutely fantastic, and we want to see more of that kind of racing. Obviously, we have more in Austria. I think the racing in Austria was really, really good, and we've had far more examples this season already than we had through the entirety of last season. Obviously, we had lots of memorable moments in that championship fight, but realistically, this season's already producing way more than we had with the previous generation of cars. So really, really good place to be. And really, really positive. And I think on that note, the second thing I want to talk about is the upgrades coming to multiple cars up the grid. Obviously, we've had a couple of weeks here. We've got AlphaTauri bringing upgrades, Alpine bringing upgrades, Mercedes expected to do something as well to maybe do a little bit more on their car. A couple of others as well potentially bring upgrades, but I think Alpine and AlphaTauri are the big ones that I've heard that are going to bring upgrades. I think Alpine are hoping for quite a bit, and I think the Alpines have looked really strong over the last few races. So if they can kick on, I think like to McLaren especially, they're big rivals in the championship this season. It could be a massive blow to McLaren if McLaren haven't been able to bring any upgrades and Alpine managed to further improve their performance. We could further expect Alpine to push ahead potentially in that midfield fight, and I do believe it'll be track dependent. A lot of the time it is, especially with midfield, but it's certainly not going to be news that McLaren will be looking forward to, and they'll probably have their fingers crossed that these upgrades for Alpine don't work as they were expected to work based on wind tunnel tests and AI tests when they're running their checks and running the parts through their design models. I'm assuming obviously from their point of view everything looks like it should work, but we all know when it gets to track it doesn't always come out the way that they believe it will when you have so many other factors potentially impacting the performance of the upgrade and the part you're introducing to the car. So let's see what happens there. But I do hope it works. I hope all the teams can continue to improve their cars. I just want it to bring them the field closer together. I wouldn't want to see the midfield fight broken up as people slowly move apart from each other. You don't want it to become a 2x2 racing environment, and I do not expect that to happen. We've already seen like cars like the Williams as an example, not particularly qualifying well, but being quite good in the race, so they can push forward. And other cars as well, their performance on Saturdays to Sundays changes, and that mixes up the grid as cars move past each other. We've seen Haas being at some races terrible, and then other races they're near the front, they're fighting as best of the rest. So that's really cool. We just want to see that continue, but as I say, hopefully these upgrades work well, brings the whole pack slightly closer together. If a team like Alpine could get a little bit closer to the front three, fantastic. Let's hope other teams come up with them, and let's just see what happens. But if it all leads to more wheel-to-wheel racing, I'm happy, and I'm sure you all be too. Let me know though in the comments below what you think. Do you think we're going to be seeing all three teams now fighting at the front in general? Do you think it's going to be track specific? Do you think a team like Alpine, McLaren, Haas, who do you think's next in line? Who's going to join those three at the front next? You know, maybe you don't think it will happen this season, but who do you think's in prime position to develop their cars and catch those front three and maybe make it a front four? So let me know in the comments below what you think. And the final thing coming into France this weekend that I want to cover is the ongoing dispute around track limits. Now, this has been a massive argument piece for the F1 drivers. In Austria, it was a huge thing. We've seen Vettel get a postponed fine of 25,000, I think it was euros, that he's being fined. Just crazy money. All because he walked out of a press conference, being deemed to not be representing drivers in the correct way. That's what the fine's for. But it is pending him making any other breaches of his contract, or however they're explaining it, over the rest of the season. And to be fair, he might do it. He might just do it to make a point. I think he can probably afford it. He may just walk out of the next one just to say, I still don't agree with you, goodbye, and take the hit on the fine that they've offered, because the drivers are really unhappy. And it all comes down to the track limits issue, right? So we saw in Austria how many drivers were getting warnings, black and white flags, and then 5-second penalties. And a lot of the time, I think that the driver's point of view is they're not even gaining. So, they're going off by a millimetre sometimes, literally a millimetre. That's not an exaggeration. We are talking fine margins. They are gaining from that indifference to actually staying slightly on the white line, really, really minimal amount of time, realistically. And yes, you could beg the question, then why are they doing it? But I think the point is they're pushing right to the edge, and if they're not really taking the mick, right, if they're not going way out wide and cutting corners, right, if we're talking millimeters, do we really think it's worth imposing 5-second penalties when they've only really gained maybe a tenth over the course of 3 times doing it? It doesn't seem right that to the drivers that's happening. So I kind of, I don't know. I think they can either redesign the track so that it wouldn't work, so the drivers are more punished for going out wide, gravel traps, things like that, old school stuff where they'll get into that. If they go too far off the track, if they're over the white line, their left tire is going to be dipping into something that's really going to slow them down, and then that way it takes away the incentive for them to push it all the way out wide, and it forces them to stay within the confines of the track layout, which I'm not against. I think that that might work, but I think with modern tracks it's harder to do. You've got the safety issues of runoff areas and the way they're designed, so they're asking drivers to stay within the white lines with at least one tire, part of it covering that white line on the exit of the tracks. And the reason this is an issue going into France is because the track massively lends itself to pushing the limit and going out wide. You gain loads of time by doing that, and as the drivers found in Austria, sometimes that will lead them to going 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters over the track limit. And what they don't have an issue with, again, the idea, the premise that they'll go, someone's driving way outside the track limits and gaining a load of time. Obviously, the drivers would be really on board with people getting punished for that. That's different. What all they're moaning about is that they were getting so many warnings for nearly basically not doing it. 1 millimeter shouldn't be warranting a punishment, or multiple punishments in some drivers' cases, and penalties for accumulatively running out wide by millimeters over the course of the race. So it just didn't add up to 5 seconds, and that was the issue that they were having, and they understood and they understand why it's being the rule is being imposed, but it isn't coming across in the way that the FIA maybe wanted it to, and the drivers are hoping to make change. We've also seen Alonso arguing about his penalties for weaving as well, and the FIA basically admitting that we've had other examples where people weren't penalised for it, but they still wouldn't overturn it. So we've got questionable decisions going on at the moment with the FIA. I'm not sure where I sort of sit on this. I think it is important for the drivers to stay within track limits, and I do agree that that should be a rule, because otherwise why do we even have track limits? But on the other hand, I think there needs to be an area of grace, right? If it isn't gaining them any time, maybe we don't need to have the punishment, because what's the point? No one's gained anything, so it really shouldn't make any difference. Of course, if they're doing anything that gains them a lasting advantage, absolutely that needs to be stopped, and then they can review each corner, maybe corner by corner, in terms of where the track limits are going to be severely imposed, and that might work better for the drivers. If they go, right, you run off at 10, 11, then we know you're going to gain loads of time by doing it, and therefore we're really going to push harsh on that corner. However, these other corners where you aren't going to gain an advantage, we're not going to look at it so harshly, but obviously anything extreme will be looked at on a case-by-case basis. Try that out. Obviously, I'm not into the politics, but we'll certainly see how it goes. But we have had multiple people, including Christian Horner and Mick Schumacher, speaking out about the fact that they do worry that this is going to become an issue with drivers constantly being penalised for just really slightly going over the track. So Schumacher's been quoted as saying, it does look a bit silly if for going a centimetre off track you get a penalty of 5 seconds, and most of the time when you go off you don't gain any lap time, which is worse. So again, as I was saying, they're not really gaining an advantage, and I think if the imposition of these sanctions, penalties, whichever word you want to use, should only be used when there is an advantage gained or a lasting advantage gained. When it doesn't make any difference, and you can see in the lap times they did not gain by doing or running over track limits at whichever corner they do, just leave it alone. Right, it doesn't help anyone. It potentially ruins the race. Right, you could have a really fantastic wheel-to-wheel race going on. It's going to get ruined by a 5-second penalty, which they'll usually take in the pit stop. Right, and that will just blow it. That completely blows the fight, because they'll come out the pit. They'll be 5 seconds behind the guy. They might not catch them again, and us as fans are then, it costs us potentially a really, really good fight in the race. So let's not have that. But anyway, They are the things to look out for this weekend. Look out for Mercedes fighting at the front, potentially with the Red Bulls and the Ferraris, as Christian Horner's predicting. Look out for other teams maybe improving as they've brought upgrades to the track. And look out for those track limit issues. How many penalties are we going to see? How many radio messages are we going to see? And let me know in the comments below your thoughts on the track limits issue. Do you think they should be stricter with how they're imposing these penalties during the race? Do you think the drivers should be able to just stay within the track limits and really it's the driver's responsibility just to sort it out? Or do you sort of agree that if it doesn't cause them any sort of advantage, then FIA just needs to stop getting involved and maybe be a bit more clear on where they're going to be looking at issues on each individual circuit depending on the advantage that's gained? Let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, guys, thank you so much for watching this episode today. If you are new around here, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. We've got multiple uploads every week, so make sure to hit the bell icon to be notified of all of those. Otherwise, I'm going to thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a great day. Enjoy the race this weekend. Goodbye.